Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about the state of Preservation Evoker. If I haven't already made enough Evoker videos already, I wanted to take the time to break down how Evoker feels in actual Dragonflight dungeon content. They just released 2 dungeons, Uldaman, Legacy of Tyr, and Nelthurus, something like that, some dragon place that are going on right now. And I wanted to give my thoughts on how Evoker really plays out in these dungeons from the preservation perspective, what I like, what I'm a little concerned about, now that we actually get to sink our teeth into things. I think that trying like Mythic Plus Keystones on Alpha is a good way to figure out the kit, but you also have to look at what the dungeons are bringing you because the meta has shifted over the years for what dungeons do to healers. Quick run through of the examples, you would have a Legion, which would have tons of one-shot mechanics and tons of threat, where tanks were incredibly survivable. You would have BFA, where trash was not quite as deadly, but it was still a lot more noticeable than you had to deal with back in Legion, but you had a lot of challenging boss fights which required large amounts of output in order to properly survive. Unlike Shadowlands, where there's a couple boss fights that require some output here and there, but by and large, you need a lot of tank support, at least you did until this very final tier in Shadowlands, where tanks are very, very self-sustainable. But early on, tanks were a lot more vulnerable, needed a lot more support, and boss fights were not nearly as deadly. What we're seeing now in Dragonflight, again, is only 2 dungeons, so take it with a grain of salt. But it looks like that not only trash, but also bosses are going to take a lot more healing for the entirety of your raid group, your party. There's a lot more group damage. There's a lot of unavoidable damage. There are certain boss fights like in Uldaman, I believe his name is Emberon, which has just constant pulsing AoE damage while you need to run around the room and kill off adds. So there can be a lot of pressure onto the Evoker healer because you need to be able to keep everybody in range, you need to be able to get your output where you need it. But as it stands at the moment, and especially after I did a lot of dungeons as Holy Priest, as Disc Priest, as all of the things, Evoker, very overtuned and very fun. At the moment, all of its heals do quite a bit more than the others, but some of the things that I really liked is that range components are not nearly as heavy as I had initially anticipated, but it does require a little bit more preparation in order to properly get it done. Okay, so the build that I ran with is a bronze build. It focuses on echo replicating output. As I mentioned in my last video and a couple last videos as well, echo allows you to replicate one spell, but it also can replicate an empowered spell like Spirit Bloom, which is kind of like a big chain heal. Okay, so the most busted stuff at the moment is casting Echo on 1 or 2 targets, maybe even more as well, but mainly like 1 or 2 targets, casting a Spirit Bloom, and those chain heals will get replicated again and cast again and just top the group in an instant. At the moment, it is way too powerful. I fully expect it to get nerfed and brought down somewhat, but the premise of being able to use Echo output to replicate healing is extremely strong for a number of different reasons. For number one, it does treat, if not solve, the problem of needing the output for your teammate who is standing out in Libya, right? It allows you to place Echo on somebody, get way out of range of them, cast that ability anyway, and still be able to heal them from a distance. This is great for tanks if you're going to be out of range of the tank. This is really good for just range DPS. I had Tettles in my group, so it was wonderful for him. And there was just a lot of power that you're able to have on hand. Evoker's kit is wonderful. You have the Cauterizing Flame ability, I believe is what it's called, which is a 1-minute cooldown, which allows you to dispel anything, which is freaking great. You can pretty much dispel curses, even though you otherwise cannot, which is particularly good in Uldaman because there was a couple infrequent curses that would appear. It was like one mob every, 5-6 trash pulls would have like a small curse you had to deal with. There's a couple bleeds in here that you could just help alleviate a bit of tank pressure with. Furthermore, going along the lines of the bronze build, there is a talent underneath time dilation. That's sort of the stagger that Evoker is giving to the tank or anybody in your group. With time dilation, you can also cast more essence abilities, I believe it is, to be able to reduce the cooldown of time dilation even further. I found this to be very helpful because on trash packs, there's mild tank pressure, but not nearly as much as we saw in Shadowlands. So you can use time dilation on your tank, but there also was a number of times that there'd be like party-wide damage from trash mobs, but there'd be like a big orb or a big damage pressure on like one of your allies that you'd need to spot heal them for a bit for until that pressure subsided. And time dilation completely shuts that down in its entirety, delaying and staggering the damage, further allowing your healing over time effect in reversion, which is your big hot, your riptide. That accounted for like almost a quarter of my total healing breakdown over the 3 or 4 dungeons I did as an evoker today. It was absolutely insane how much output you're doing, not only from the hot itself, from echoed hots, from I believe it is called Golden Hour, which will quickly heal, or the instant heal is additional because they took damage in the past 5-6 seconds, something like that. That is extremely helpful as well. So you have these hots, you're able to set them up, and by elongating and spreading and shutting down the damage, you are in wonderful shape. Some of the big concerns, I would say, are probably like tuning at the moment. Disintegrate, if you have excess essence, if you have like essence burst procs, casting on Disintegrate is pretty terrible. There is some class builds that you have on the left side, which allow you to cast Fire Breath and then follow it up with a Living Flame. That's kind of like your smite, and it'll hit additional targets, and it'll also hit targets for more. That is freaking ridiculously insane. If you are charging up a full stack, full essence Fire Breath, that's a 4 stack essence, or a level 4 essence attack, right? That'll allow you to hit 4 additional targets with Living Flame. Now, the interesting catch to that is you could also use this on a single target boss fight. You can cast a full 4 second essence, or not even a 4 second, a full level 4 Fire Breath on a single target boss fight, and then your Living Flame is going to hit 4 additional targets. Well, if you're fighting a single target boss, you can always just cast that Living Flame to the boss. It'll hit 1 target there, and then it spreads out and heals 4 other targets for a pretty hefty amount. So you're able to use your damage to convert into AoE output as needed, and that makes your life a lot easier to be able to sustain your group, still deal damage, still watch out for your allies, all of that good stuff. It makes a very, very considerable difference, as I've noticed a lot of times. You also are able to get the Fire Breath damage, converting into regular output, but probably the biggest thing that I noticed was being able to lean on a 15-second Spirit Bloom cooldown with Echo interaction to be able to carry the load for most of your healing. One of the things I also was doing throughout the dungeon, which was probably not the highest damage, but probably one of the highest safety components, was utilizing Azure Strike constantly, because I don't really know Hunter that well, so correct me if I'm wrong on this one. But Hunter having a lot of instant casts is one of the things it's been known for, but there's a lot of times where I've noticed Hunters have to stand still, they have to channel certain abilities, they have to plant their feet to be able to get some big stuff off. And that's sort of how I feel Evoker is going to play in both a Raid and a Mythic Plus environment, is that something like Azure Strike can have an extremely crucial role as generating essence bursts as you are moving, as you are repositioning yourself, as you are running along with the tank as he is grouping together mobs. There's a lot of tight corridors and narrow hallways in these first 2 dungeons that we've experienced, which in a world without snapping means that you're going to run through packs, get behind line of sight, rally all of them together, and an ability that deals mild and light damage like Azure Strike is really effective for being able to generate additional essence to allow you to cast Echoes, that's the spender, and then be able to set up output a little bit later on. You also have very good interactions out of things like Stasis, where you can echo 2 players, cast Spirit Bloom, so you get a total of 3 Spirit Bloom casts going off all at once, and then you're able to have those 3 casted abilities sit in stasis for an additional 30 seconds. So some of the ridiculousness that I was experiencing in these dungeons was holding that stasis, that 3 stack, so that I could quickly do the whole combo again if there was even more damage. And I was asking Trell just to go wall to wall with these pulls so that we would be able to really test some of the limits of it. And so you would be able to have that crazy combo, use it again with stasis, And then you could also use Rewind, which felt like a fantastic hot to be able to utilize. I need to do a better job of playing around with Renewing Blaze, which sort of has a similar type of rewind effect where you're healing up for all the damage that you had previously taken. That one is another one I want to be able to play around with a little bit more, and basically just being more effective with using my Fire Breath and sort of Living Flame combinations. 100% Evoker's like crazy overtuned compared to some of the other classes that I'm playing at the moment, but I do think that you have a very sort of clear-cut look as to what you can be playing with and what you can be focusing on in that bronze build as a 5-man. I think even if they start changing around some of the tuning, for example, if they're going to make Spirit Bloom a little bit less powerful or not replicate echoes in their entirety, I do think a very heavy echo build would still be ridiculously strong. For one, you have the talent in the middle bottom. It's the 3-pointer right above the stasis capstone. It's called Grace Period, which increases your healing output on targets that have reversion on them. And that one is ridiculously good for when it comes to trying to heal up your group, because you could very easily build up all those essence bursts like I was talking about, and then leverage them to put out echoes onto people. Cast one reversion, you've suddenly hotted up 3, 4, 5 people in your group, and you have a healing bonus on hand. As Graal had mentioned in the Evoker Roundtable, I do agree with him that using something like Dragon Breath, your empowered frontal, you probably will only cast that at like 1 stack in a key environment, because getting additional cooldown reduction for it isn't always really that beneficial for the dungeons that you're going into. Probably the biggest thing right now is having to plant your feet and commit to casting an empowered ability in a key environment. I think it makes it a lot harder for healers and probably DPS evokers as well to properly judge how much the tank is going to pull and like where they can stand, where they can plant their feet, because committing to an empower spell and then having to move and cancel it feels absolutely horrendous. So that'll probably be where those lower ranks of empowerment kind of come from, is knowing that sometimes, especially if you're pugging and learning the dungeons with the group, you might just have to send a 1 or 2 stack in power instead of actively trying to build it up to the 3, because somebody's just going to outrange you and you're going to have to deal with all that garbage. So overall, I'm really curious to see what they're going to do to some of the mana constraints, as it was very noticeable once you got into a heavy bronze build how terrible Emerald Blossom was. That is your other spender. You pretty much needed everybody to be stacked up to gain any sort of value from it. But part of the value is that it is a ground-based effect. I think it technically might be better if you're able to get a reticule to be able to place Emerald Blossom down. I'm not as big of a fan of actually just casting it on a player, but that's just me. It's something that's kind of just an efflorescence on its own, so I think that it should just be more of a reticule, kind of like a Holy Word Sanctify, rather than something that casts at a player. As I noticed, there were times where we had to all run as a group on certain boss fights, and if I dropped it, it would place it where somebody is, but not necessarily where they're going. And so that was a bit more of a frustration that I had to deal with, and I think would be a lot better if you could just place it down wherever you want and not have to worry about targeting a player or targeting it onto yourself and having to position yourself in odd ways. But overall, I'm really impressed by how hard this spec hits. I do think that they're going to have a lot of changes to it, but the utility you bring in a 5-man environment for like the Oppressing Roar, the kick, the additional damage you're able to do that can convert into healing output, as well as being able to offer like damage reduction to your team, I think is going to be incredibly valuable, because the way I see the dungeons, and maybe it's my bias, the way I hope that these dungeons are going to come around is that they're going to require a lot more output than some of the garbage can bosses of like Halkias, or the third boss in Halls of Atonement whose name nobody really knows, right? Some of these boss fights that have just, we've known them forever and they've never really done anything and never really had any impact, I want to do away with entirely. And in a world where boss fights are scary again, I think Preservation Evoker can easily earn its bread in a high key pushing environment from what I've seen so far. But let me know what you think. If you have any other kind of questions or anything about where Evoker stands or some different builds you guys would like me to check out, be sure to link them either in the comments down below or in our Dragonflight Alpha Discord channel, also linked in the description. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope y'all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.